Good evening, and welcome. Tonight, the night itself feels heavy, doesn't it? The kind of weight that presses against your chest, that makes the silence between sounds feel louder than the sounds themselves. It's the silence of hallways after everyone has gone to bed, the silence of empty fields, the silence inside your own breathing when you realize you're the only one awake. This is where our stories begin. 7 tales, each one drifting from a different shadow, each one carrying its own echo. Some will lead you into abandoned places. Others will trap you in the fragile moments between waking and dreaming. None of them will offer a way back unchanged. So lie down. Let the dark in the corners of your room stretch a little further. Let the walls around you dissolve, and let my voice take you into the night. Because once you step into these stories, you may find they don't end when the telling does. Story 1. The Vanishing Convoy. The desert highway stretched endlessly beneath the pale wash of the moon, its cracked asphalt shimmering faintly as though still holding the heat of the day. He had been driving for hours, lulled into a strange rhythm where the hum of the tires and the drone of the engine blended into something hypnotic, like a mechanical lullaby meant only for him. Out here, between Barstow and nowhere, time did not feel linear. It folded in on itself, each mile identical to the last, every curve of the road an echo of the one before. The CB radio hissed softly on the passenger seat, tuned low, carrying the occasional fragment of voices he couldn't quite place, laughter fading too quickly, a single word cut off mid-syllable, static threaded with the faint impression of something human. He told himself it was bleed-through from another channel, but still he kept the volume low, as though not to invite attention. It was on a stretch of highway where the road dipped gently into a hollow that he first noticed them. Headlights in the rearview mirror, too many, moving too precisely. He blinked and adjusted the glass. At first, it looked like a pair of trucks, maybe 3. But then, as the convoy drew nearer, he realized there were at least a dozen vehicles, each identical, each moving in perfect unison, the rhythm of their wheels unnervingly exact. He slowed, expecting them to overtake, but they did not. Instead, their formation adjusted around him, enclosing him like an insect pinned inside a shifting jar of lightless hulks. Their headlights remained dim, almost muted, the beams barely touching the asphalt ahead. What struck him most, however, was the silence. Even with his windows cracked, he could hear no engines, no roar of diesel or rattle of freight. The only sound was his own machine, laboring as though dragging against unseen weight. The trucks were old models, boxy, painted a dull military gray that seemed to absorb what little moonlight touched them. He noticed they bore no logos, no license plates, nothing to mark their purpose. The trailers they hauled were sealed tight, plain metal with rivets glinting faintly. And still, he couldn't shake the sense that something inside them shifted, faintly, with the motion of the convoy. He drove on, trapped within their silent company. Mile after mile, time lost shape. The highway seemed longer than it should have been, desert scrub rolling endlessly past in pale blurs. Once, in the corner of his eye, he thought he saw a light moving within one of the trailers, a quick flicker, like an arc of lightning contained in metal. He glanced directly at it, and the glow was gone. His hands tightened on the wheel. He thought of pulling to the shoulder, letting them pass, but the shoulder itself seemed to stretch unnaturally narrow, the sand creeping closer, the road hemmed in by darkness. When he glanced into the mirror again, his breath caught. The convoy had grown longer. There were more vehicles now, filling the horizon behind him, a line of hulking shadows that swallowed the road in both directions. He was no longer following them. He was inside them, part of a procession that had no beginning and no end. Each truck identical, each trailer humming with its silent, shifting cargo. And when he reached for the CB, intending to call out, the static hissed with sudden clarity. A voice, faint but steady, spoke his name. He tried to shake the sound from his head, convincing himself that the hiss of the CB had only arranged itself into something that resembled his name. Static does that, he thought, a trick of the mind. But the conviction dissolved as the convoy shifted around him. The trucks no longer stayed at a polite distance. Their hulking frames closed in, a metal corridor moving with him, pressing him forward into some invisible center. Their trailers loomed so near he could see the seams in their panels, the rivets trembling slightly as though under strain. His headlights swept across their surfaces, and for an instant the dull metal seemed to ripple, as though not solid but fluid, shimmering faintly like oil on water. He slowed, gently tapping the brake, but their pace matched his, seamless, as if anticipating his hesitation before he made it. When he sped up, they did too. He realized then that he no longer drove of his own will. He was being carried, absorbed into the rhythm of something far larger, something that had no interest in letting him slip away. The air around the convoy grew colder. He rolled up his window without knowing why, but it didn't help. The chill seeped through the glass, clung to the metal frame of his truck, settled into his skin. His breath fogged faintly in front of his face. The night outside remained clear and dry, yet within his cab, the temperature dropped as though he had entered a refrigerated vault. When the CB crackled again, he reached for it with shaking hands. This time there was no name, only a long, low hum, deep, resonant, vibrating in his bones. It was the same hum that seemed to emanate from the trailers themselves, the vibration he felt through the wheel, through the seat, through the very air he breathed. It rose and fell with a rhythm disturbingly close to a heartbeat. He glanced left, then right. For the first time he caught sight of the drivers. Each cab's window glowed faintly green, lit not by dashboard lights but by something deeper inside, a phosphorescent wash that painted the interiors with sickly color. The figures behind the wheels sat perfectly upright, hands fixed to the steering wheels at identical angles. Their faces were pale, unnaturally pale, and though he strained to see, he could not make out eyes, only the impression of hollows, dark and empty. One of them turned. The motion was slow, deliberate, as though lubricated by a machinery of bone. Its face angled toward him, and though the hollow sockets were empty, he felt seen, not observed, measured, weighed, placed into some unknown order. He jerked his gaze forward again, heart pounding. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, the two-lane road a ribbon floating through darkness. Yet the horizon never shifted. He could not remember the last mile marker, the last turnoff, the last sign of habitation. It was as though the convoy had peeled him out of the real highway and onto its own road, a path that belonged only to them. The hum deepened, resonant, filling his chest cavity until his breath stuttered. His hands ached on the wheel. He wanted to slam the brakes, to tear free, to abandon the truck and run into the scrub. But when he glanced out the side window, there was no desert anymore, only darkness, dense and shimmering, as if the convoy rolled not on asphalt but through a tunnel of night itself. And in the mirror, always the mirror, the line of vehicles stretched backward into infinity. No beginning, no end, and all of them are waiting. The hum thickened until it was no longer sound but pressure, a vibration pressing against his ribs, pulsing at the back of his skull. He tightened his grip on the wheel, sweat prickling across his palms despite the impossible chill in the cab. His headlights felt dimmer now, barely cutting the distance ahead, while the trucks on either side of him gleamed faintly, their matte gray trailers trembling with some internal tension. It began subtly, a faint pulse of light flickering behind the riveted seams, like a heartbeat pressing outward. He blinked, telling himself it was his eyes, tired after too many miles. But the light pulsed again, brighter this time, seeping from the edges of the metal panels in a pale greenish glow. He slowed. The truck slowed. He sped, they followed. There was no escape from their rhythm. One trailer directly to his right grew brighter, as though the walls themselves had turned translucent. And then he saw. Not clearly, not fully, only shadows at first. A twisting mass, formless yet alive, pressing against the metal like something submerged beneath ice. It shifted as though aware of his gaze, coiling slowly, impossibly large, stretching from one end of the trailer to the other. When it moved, the rivets bulged outward, groaning faintly, but the hum drowned the sound. His chest clenched. His instinct screamed at him not to look, to keep his eyes fixed on the road. But the glow drew him back, his vision locked against his will. Another trailer lit up ahead. This one revealed not a single vast shape, but many smaller forms, hunched and swaying. They moved in unison, rows of figures crowded together, their outlines blurred, their heads hanging low. For one moment, he thought they were people passengers crammed into the dark, but then their heads snapped up as one, eyes pale and luminous, turning toward him though no window separated them. Their faces were blank, their mouths too wide, and even across the asphalt corridor he thought he heard the faintest scrape of teeth grinding. He tore his gaze forward. His heart thundered, breath sharp. The wheel trembled beneath his hands, not from his grip but from the rhythm of the hum, shaking the entire truck. His mirrors showed only the infinite procession behind, each trailer beginning to glow, one by one, like lanterns igniting in sequence. He whispered to himself, just to hear his own voice, to anchor himself. But the sound was swallowed, thin and useless. The hum was everywhere, in the air, in his lungs, inside his bones. And then the CB crackled again. Not static this time, a voice. "You're late." The words emerged flat, toneless, neither male nor female, neither near nor far. They pressed into him like a thought he had not made himself. He snatched the radio, thumb hovering over the switch, but no words would form. Another trailer ahead glowed brighter still, its walls nearly transparent. Inside, a single figure floated, suspended, limbs spread wide, body turning slowly, as though adrift in water. Its hair drifted around its head in slow motion, its chest unmoving, its eyes closed. The pale light that filled the container seemed to radiate from the body itself, pulsing outward, each pulse perfectly synchronized with the hum vibrating in his skull. He could not look away. His grip loosened, the wheel drifting, the edge of the asphalt tilting beneath him. Tires screamed faintly, but the convoy shifted too, adjusting without sound, guiding him back into place. The trucks had closed tighter, their trailers brushing so close that if he had rolled down his window, he could have touched them. The figure's eyes opened. They were not human eyes, too dark, too deep, spirals rather than pupils, pulling at him, tugging his breath into silence. His vision blurred. For a moment, he felt himself drifting too, suspended in the same pale glow, his body weightless, his thoughts stretched thin. The hum became a chant, rhythmic, ceremonial, as if thousands of voices spoke without mouths. He blinked hard. The road snapped back, his cab solid, his breath tearing through his chest in ragged gasps. He forced himself to look ahead, but the trailers continued to glow. More and more of them now revealed their contents, masses that writhed, figures half-formed, faces pressed against metal as though desperate to escape. Some shapes were enormous, spindly limbs folded in impossible ways. Others were small, dozens crammed together, rocking in eerie synchrony. And all of them, everyone turned toward him when he looked, their awareness undeniable. The desert had vanished completely. Outside his cab, there was nothing but the glow of the trailers and the darkness between them, a tunnel carved through unreality. His headlights illuminated nothing. Even the painted lines on the road had disappeared. He was being carried, not driving. His truck locked into the convoy's rhythm. The CB spoke again. This time, the voice was clearer, layered, as though many throats spoke through one mouth. "Keep driving." His throat was dry. His mind screamed at him to slam the brakes, to swerve, to do something. But his body did not obey. His foot pressed steady on the pedal, his hands fixed on the wheel. His movements were no longer his. He was part of the procession, and still the trailers glowed brighter. The figure in the nearest one pressed its hand to the glass, palm flat, as though reaching. Its fingers were longer than human, too many joints, nails blackened like claws. He thought he felt the pressure on his chest, as though the touch had crossed through glass and air and space to rest against him directly. The hum reached a peak, vibrating so fiercely that his teeth rattled. His vision doubled, the world splitting in shimmering lines. He closed his eyes, desperate. But even in the dark he saw them, the shapes, the faces, the spirals in their eyes. When he opened them again, the convoy had stopped. No screech of brakes, no deceleration. Simply motion one moment, stillness the next. The trucks stood silent, humming, their trailers glowing in perfect unison. He could not see the desert, the stars, the sky, only the procession, endless in both directions, and the light pulsing, pulsing, pulsing. The CB crackled. "Step out." His hand moved before thought could stop it. The truck door groaned as he pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, thick and metallic, stinging his lungs. The hum was louder outside, the vibration stronger, as though the earth itself trembled beneath the weight of what the convoy carried. He set one foot on the asphalt, or what passed for asphalt now. It did not feel solid. It shifted slightly under his weight, granular, like standing on packed sand. The glow from the trailers lit the ground, and he saw no lines, no markings, only a pale, endless surface stretching in both directions. He looked back into his cab, half expecting to see himself still behind the wheel, but the seat was empty. The hum deepened once more. All the trailers began to open. He stood with one foot on the surface that might have been asphalt, might have been something else entirely. The glow of the trailers washing the world in a pale, underwater light. Time thickened here, each second swelling until it felt like hours, or perhaps the reverse hours collapsing into the space of a single breath. The convoy stretched in both directions, immovable, endless, as though it had grown out of the darkness rather than traveled through it. He tried to trace the line of trailers into the horizon, but there was no horizon anymore. The glow bled into itself, folding distance flat, until all he could see were repeating shapes: box, wheel, cab, box, wheel, cab, infinite. His truck stood behind him, door open, engine idling in silence. He thought he should feel tethered to it, grateful for its solidity, for the familiar smell of diesel and worn upholstery. But the longer he stared, the more it seemed unfamiliar, shrunken, like a toy placed carelessly on this flat, glowing stage. It could not save him. It belonged here no more than he did. The hum had changed too. No longer a steady vibration. It had softened into something almost like music, a deep, layered drone with notes that rose and fell in patterns too precise to be accidental. It was a choir without words, a liturgy spoken by the machines themselves. And though he could not understand it, his body responded, the rhythm weaving into his pulse, syncing with the beat of his blood. For a moment, he felt calm. The fear receded, washed over by the strange beauty of the glow. The light caressed the edges of the trailers, silver green and soft, like moonlight rippling across water. The figures within no longer appeared monstrous but serene, swaying gently, their movements hypnotic. He wondered if they were dreaming, caught between sleep and waking, and if the convoy itself was nothing more than the expression of that dream. He closed his eyes. The hum filled him. He imagined letting go, slipping fully into the rhythm, forgetting the road, the desert, the long hours of driving. There was a strange relief in the idea, as though surrendering here was not death but transformation, a release from the endless miles and the loneliness of the cab. When he opened his eyes again, the trailers closest to him had shifted. Their surfaces no longer appeared solid. Instead, they shimmered with depth, as though the metal had become translucent water. Shapes drifted within, suspended, not pressing outward this time, but floating, suspended in luminous calm. He thought he saw his own reflection among them, not a mirror image exactly, but something familiar: the curve of a shoulder, the tilt of a head, the outline of hands clasped at rest. The more he looked, the more certain he became. It was himself, adrift within the light, eyes closed, body weightless, already part of the procession. He staggered back. The surface beneath his feet shifted again, gritty and loose, the sensation of sand sliding. He bent instinctively to touch it, expecting coarse desert grains, but his hand brushed only cool nothingness, a textureless surface that resisted and yielded at once, like pressing against the skin of a dream. Somewhere down the line, deeper within the convoy, a trailer door groaned. The sound echoed faintly, metallic and hollow, reverberating across the procession. He turned his head, but the glow blurred his vision, distances collapsing. He could not tell if the door was 10 feet away or 1,000, and then he realized others were opening too. Not fully, not yet. Only an inch here, a crack there, a seam splitting, just enough to exhale. From those fissures came no air, no dust, but a faint wash of something colder than cold, a breath that was not wind but awareness. It touched him lightly, invisible fingers brushing against the back of his neck. The hum deepened once more, resolving into a single, resonant tone that silenced all thought. And in that silence, a single realization took root, patient and absolute. The convoy had stopped for him. The first sound was not a slam or a screech, but a sigh. Metal exhaled. Hinges that had not turned in years, or perhaps had never turned at all, shifted with a long, drawn-out groan. The trailers, stretching into infinity, began to open one by one, their doors splitting down the middle, spilling faint cracks of light onto the surface that might once have been asphalt. He stood frozen, hands clenched at his sides, unable to retreat. Each opening was slow, deliberate, like the peeling back of eyelids, and within those widening fissures the glow thickened, coiling outward in tendrils, spilling into the air like smoke made of light. It drifted low, pooling around his legs, luminous fog clinging with the weight of liquid. The hum rose with each door, not many voices now, but one, the convoy itself, speaking, stretching its breath across him. The vibration pressed into his sternum, rattled his teeth, blurred the edges of his sight. The nearest trailer opened fully. He braced for the shape he had glimpsed earlier, the twisted shadow pressing against rivets. But what emerged was worse in its quietness. There was nothing inside, only light impossibly bright, impossibly deep, filling the hollow container as though the trailer was a vessel for some fragment of another world. Within that light drifted images, not forms exactly, but impressions. He saw a stretch of desert road he recognized, his own headlights cutting through the dark. He saw his truck from above, crawling across endless asphalt. He saw himself, hunched and pale behind the wheel, lips moving as though whispering something. Though no sound escaped, he stumbled back, but the ground shifted again, refusing to let him fall. His balance held against his will, his feet locked to the not quite asphalt beneath him. Another trailer opened. This one revealed not visions but shapes human at first glance. Dozens of them, suspended in rows like marionettes hung on invisible wires. Their limbs dangled, their heads bent forward. As the glow intensified, each head lifted in unison, faces tilting toward him. Their eyes were hollow spirals, and as they stared, he felt the rhythm of the hum twist inside his veins. The CB crackled from his cab behind him. He turned, desperate for the sound of a familiar voice, but what came through was not one voice at all. It was his own. Step closer. He stared at the radio, dread swelling like a tide. The voice repeated, identical in tone, identical in cadence. A recording of himself, giving instructions he had never spoken. When he turned back, more trailers had opened. The procession blazed now with light, an unbroken corridor of pale, pulsating brilliance. Within each container something shifted, some offered visions, some revealed crowds, some showed vast, coiled shadows moving with liquid grace. Each vision was different, yet all bent toward him, aware of him, waiting. He realized then that the convoy was not carrying cargo. The convoy was carrying possibilities. Each trailer a vessel for a different truth, a different version of what he might become. And as they opened, one by one, they were offering him a choice, or perhaps not a choice at all, but an inevitability. The hum swelled until it was not a sound but a field, a force pressing down on his shoulders, bowing his head. He gasped, struggled, tried to lift his chin. But when he did, he saw himself again, this time not reflected in light, not drifting in glow, but standing within a trailer at the far end of the line, watching with eyes as hollow as the others. His double raised a hand. The trailers groaned louder. Their doors yawned wide, light spilling in waves, and for a single dizzying moment, the road dissolved entirely. There was no convoy, no desert, no cab behind him. Only an infinite hall of glowing chambers, each filled with something vast and waiting, each tethered to him by a thread he could not see but could feel in his blood. And the voice on the CB, his own voice, multiplied into 1,000 overlapping layers, spoke once more. Choose. He did not move. He could not. The corridor of light stretched before him, and time slowed into a syrupy drag, each second elongating until it felt both endless and fragile, like glass stretched too thin. The trailers, now yawning wide, did not reveal themselves all at once but in waves, as though some invisible conductor orchestrated their unveiling. First one, then three, then another further down, each exhaling its glow in a slow breath, each aligning with the rhythm of the hum that now seemed less a sound than a tide rolling through his chest. The air thickened. It carried no scent, yet it had weight, as if inhaling required him to draw in more than oxygen. He felt as though he was drinking something luminous, something alive, each breath coating his lungs in liquid light. It should have burned, but instead it calmed, drugged, pulling him deeper into the rhythm. He looked at his hands. They shimmered faintly, outlines blurred at the edges. The skin no longer felt like his own, but like a translucent sheath over something waiting to emerge. He flexed his fingers, The motion rippled, delayed, as though another version of his hand moved first, and his body only followed. The open trailers no longer seemed separate from each other. Their light bled together, merging into one vast glow that pulsed in unison, not like lanterns on a road, but like organs in a body. Each chamber, a ventricle. Each hum, a heartbeat. The convoy was alive. The convoy was one. Shapes within the glow drifted, indistinct yet familiar. He thought he saw faces from his childhood, old friends long gone, strangers glimpsed only once, shadows that might have been memories or might have been dreams. They passed slowly across the light like fish moving behind frosted glass, their motions languid, timeless, and every so often, one would pause and press against the surface, close enough that he could almost recognize it, almost name it before it slipped away again, absorbed into the infinite procession. The ground beneath him softened further. He felt less like he was standing on a road than floating on a current, his feet no longer carrying weight. He wondered if he lifted them, would he drift forward without effort, pulled into the light? The thought was both terrifying and comforting. His truck behind him seemed impossibly far now, though he had taken only a few steps. It crouched in the dark like a forgotten toy, its form dissolving at the edges, as though it had never belonged here and was being erased by degrees. Even if he ran, he knew he could not reach it. The CB crackled faintly again. He turned, startled, but no sound came. Only static, soft and steady, like breathing. Yet as he listened, he realized the static matched his own breath. Every inhale, every exhale. The trailers pulsed once more. He looked down the infinite corridor, his gaze drawn inexorably to the farthest point, where the glow condensed into a single blinding heart. For an instant, he saw himself standing there, his double again, watching with stillness, hand raised not in greeting but in command, and the realization sank into him, heavy and irrefutable. He was not being asked to choose. He already had. The hum swelled until it was unbearable. It was no longer outside him, no longer even around him, but inside, stitched into the marrow of his bones, flowing through his bloodstream like a second pulse. His chest rose and fell in perfect synchrony with the convoy's vibration, and for one disorienting instant he could not remember if his heart had ever beaten at its own rhythm, or if it had always belonged here, tuned to this endless procession. The trailers stood open now, every one of them, a corridor of light without beginning or end. Their interiors shifted and rippled, 100 visions competing at once. In one he saw himself crumpled on the side of a desert road, empty truck still idling. In another he stood years older, eyes black, seated behind the wheel of one of the glowing cabs. In yet another he walked down a suburban street in daylight, his neighbors smiling, their mouths too wide, their teeth glimmering like polished chrome. Each possibility flickered like a slide in an infinite reel, flashing just long enough to root itself in his mind before dissolving into the next. He swayed on his feet. His hands no longer felt like his own. His skin thrummed with borrowed electricity. The air pressed against him, thick, urging him forward. He resisted, but his resistance was paper-thin, flimsy, dissolving in the tide. The figure at the farthest point of the convoy, the double, the shadow self, lifted its hand again. This time, he felt his arm rise in answer. He tried to fight it, to hold it down, but the effort dissolved into nothing. His body moved without him, mirroring the gesture exactly, like a puppet caught in its strings. The CB in his truck crackled once more, erupting with his own voice, multiplied into layers, a chorus of himself. Step in. He staggered forward. The ground shifted beneath him like liquid, rippling with each step. The glow grew hotter, though it gave no heat, only a pressure against his skull, against his lungs. He moved past the first open trailer. Within, rows of figures hung suspended like mannequins, eyes empty, mouths slack. For a heartbeat, he thought he recognized one of them, a fleeting resemblance, his old coworker, a childhood friend, his own father. But then the light shifted and the faces blurred into strangers. He moved to the next. In it, he saw a desert landscape swallowed by storm, black clouds tearing across the horizon, and himself standing alone beneath it, arms raised as though beckoning the storm closer. Another step, another trailer. This one revealed a reflection of his cab, but wrong, the seats reversed, the wheel spinning itself, the mirrors angled inward to reflect not the road but his own staring eyes. He wanted to run, to wrench himself free, to hurl his body into the dark. But there was no dark anymore. Only light and glow and hum, endless, patient. His movements were not his own. He stopped before one trailer brighter than the rest. Within, a single figure floated, suspended in pale radiance. Its face was his face. Its chest rose and fell in rhythm with his breath. Its eyes were closed, lips parted as though whispering something too faint to hear. For a moment he felt the tug of peace. If he stepped in, there would be no more desert roads, no more endless nights, no more loneliness in the cab. There would be only rhythm, only light, only the convoy's eternal forward motion. His double's eyes opened. The spirals inside them reached outward, twisting into him, threading through his vision. He gasped as the world around him warped, the trailers bending, the ground undulating, his own body thinning into strands of light. He felt himself unraveling, each thought stretched into brightness, each memory dissolving into glow. He could not tell if he was dying or becoming something larger. The hum crescendoed, and then silence. He blinked. The convoy was gone. He sat in his cab, engine idling, headlights cutting through the desert night. The road stretched ahead, empty, two thin lanes of cracked asphalt bordered by endless scrub. No glow, no trucks, only the faint whisper of wind through open space. His hands trembled on the wheel. His breath came ragged, shallow, but his body was his again. He glanced in the mirror. The desert behind him was empty too. No lights, no procession, no infinite line of trailers, just darkness. He exhaled, a laugh catching in his throat, brittle and sharp. It was over. Whatever it had been, it had ended. But as he reached to turn the CB dial, static flared. Not loud, not urgent, just a whisper, like breath on glass. And through the static, his own voice drifted back to him. Keep driving. He froze. The headlights ahead flickered once, just faintly, as though the world had blinked. And in the rearview mirror, far at first but unmistakable, a single pale glow bloomed on the horizon. The glow on the horizon lingered only a moment, faint as a memory, then folded back into the night. He sat in the cab, hands unmoving on the wheel, listening to the engine's low purr as though it belonged to someone else's truck. The CB had fallen silent again, but the silence felt deliberate, a pause between breaths. The desert stretched wide around him, vast and empty, yet not empty at all. Shadows shifted at the edges of his headlights, not in motion but in presence, like figures waiting just beyond the reach of sight. He blinked, and they were gone, though the sensation of being counted, measured, remained heavy on his chest. When he finally pressed the gas and rolled forward, the road opened obediently, unbroken, as though nothing had ever stood in his way. Yet the hum lingered still, faint, pulsing in his bones like an echo he could never shake. He did not look back again. But somewhere in the rearview mirror of memory, the line of trailers still gleamed, endless, patient, waiting for him to notice when he closed his eyes. Story 2. The Locked Attic. When Claire first unlocked the door to her grandmother's house, the air that spilled out was not stale but strangely heavy, as though it had been waiting all these years just for her. Dust motes drifted lazily in the thin light that cut across the hallway, but beneath their shimmer the silence had weight, pressing down in a way that felt less like abandonment and more like a held breath. She had not been here since childhood. The house stood at the edge of a rural town where the streets seemed too wide for their population, the storefronts faded and half forgotten. People had warned her the place was falling apart, but when she walked through those first rooms, the kitchen with its yellowing wallpaper, the parlor with its cracked piano, the narrow hallway where shadows collected, everything appeared almost preserved, as though time had folded in on itself and refused to move forward. Her grandmother's presence still lingered in the furniture, the crooked photographs, the old radio on the mantel. Claire thought she could almost hear her voice in the hush, faint and indistinct, as though caught between stations. But it was the attic door that drew her attention from the start. At the top of the staircase, narrow and steep, the door waited, not wide like the others, but slender, angular, set deeper into the wall as if the house itself had grown around it. Its surface was painted a darker shade than the rest of the trim, the brass knob tarnished green with age, and there was a lock. A small, intricate one, built not into the knob but into the wood itself, like an afterthought, a boundary deliberately marked. Her grandmother had always told her not to go there. As a child, she had obeyed. though she remembered standing at the foot of the staircase on certain nights, craning her neck upward, swearing she heard something faint behind that door. A shuffle, a low murmur, a sound not unlike breathing. Now, alone in the house, older but no less curious, the attic seemed less forbidden than unfinished, as though her inheritance would not be complete until she opened it. She placed her hand on the banister, feeling the grooves of old wood worn smooth by decades, and began to climb. Each step creaked, not with the randomness of aging timber, but in a rhythm that unnerved her, too measured, too deliberate. By the time she reached the top, the silence pressed in heavier, the air colder, the shadows deeper. The lock gleamed faintly, and though she had not yet touched it, she swore she felt the attic door pulse, almost imperceptibly, like something behind it had just leaned forward to listen. That first night she could not bring herself to sleep in the upstairs bedroom, though it had once been hers as a child. The bed was still there, its quilt folded neatly, smelling faintly of cedar and lavender. Yet when she lay down, every creak of the house seemed to converge in the ceiling above her head. It was as though the beams themselves carried whispers down from the attic, each sound stretching long and thin, until the silence felt alive. She rolled over, staring at the plaster walls, remembering how her grandmother used to hum lullabies in the evenings, soft and low, a rhythm that had once been comforting. Now the tune returned to her unbidden, though she could not be sure if it was memory or sound carried faintly from above. The melody bent itself, slowed, became something unrecognizable, the shape of a song but without the warmth. In half-sleep she imagined the attic door not closed but ajar, light spilling through the crack in a thin white beam that reached all the way to her bed. She saw herself rise, barefoot on the floorboards, drifting upward without sound. Drawn to it, the knob turned beneath her hand, and as the door in her dream creaked open, the light was not light at all but a slow, rolling shadow that poured down like smoke. It filled the hall, it seeped into her lungs, and in its depth, she thought she saw a face blurred, expressionless, waiting. She woke up with a start, but the room was still. Only the faint smell of dust and the tick of the old clock downstairs reached her. And yet, when she listened, truly listened, she could swear she heard the same low creak of the staircase as though someone were climbing slowly, step by step, toward that locked door. She did not move. She only lay there, staring into the dark, heart pacing with each imagined footfall, until the silence returned again, heavier than before. And when she finally drifted back into uneasy sleep, her dreams carried her back to the attic, always to the attic, as though the house itself had only one true destination. Morning came muted, as though the sun itself hesitated to spill light across the old house. Claire rose late, her body heavy with unrest, her dreams lingering too close to waking thought. She moved through the kitchen with its sagging counters, boiled water for coffee, but the routine felt hollow, a gesture performed for an absent audience. It was then, rifling absently through the drawer by the sink, that she found it. A key, small, iron, its teeth uneven and delicate, as though meant for something older than the locks she knew. It rested beneath a scatter of rubber bands and paper clips, unremarkable in its hiding place yet undeniably deliberate. Her hand hovered over it, reluctant, until her fingers closed around the cold metal. The weight of it was slight, but it seemed to drag at her wrist, as though it carried gravity from another time. She remembered her grandmother's words, half warnings, half riddles told years ago when she was still a child. Some doors aren't meant to be opened until they ask for it. At the time she had thought it nonsense, the kind of thing old people say to keep children obedient. But standing in the dim kitchen now, the memory coiled back with the precision of something planted for this very moment. She pocketed the key without thinking. The metal burned faintly against her thigh through the fabric, not with heat, but with a pressure, like a pulse that did not belong to her. The day stretched long and formless. She tried to busy herself with small tasks, sorting through the boxes stacked in the hallway, wiping dust from the mantel, airing out the parlor. Yet each room seemed to angle her gaze upward, to pull her attention to the ceiling, where the attic door waited. Even the air tasted faintly of wood long shut away, of fabric left in trunks, of something deeper that resisted naming. By evening, she could no longer avoid it. The staircase loomed again, narrow, darkening with the fall of twilight. She climbed slowly, each step protesting beneath her, the key heavy in her pocket. When she reached the top landing, the door seemed different, no longer dormant, but alert, its edges trembling faintly in the dim light, as though something beyond pressed close, listening. Her fingers closed around the key. For a moment, she thought she heard her grandmother's voice again, clearer than memory, whispering just behind her ear. She could not make out the words, only the tone a hush, not warning, not invitation, but acknowledgement. She slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her hand all along. She did not turn it yet. She only stood, breath shallow, aware of the silence pressing from both sides of the door, heavy, deliberate, patient. Her hand lingered on the key, knuckles pale in the dusklight, the metal cool against her skin yet radiating a strange gravity. She told herself she would wait, that she would not turn it yet, that she would come back tomorrow in daylight when shadows could not reach so deep. But the longer she stood, the less she believed her own resolve. The silence pressed close. It was not an absence of sound, but a fullness, a layered hush that seemed to breathe with her. Each inhalation drew her deeper into it. Each exhalation tethered her to the door. She felt the rhythm shift, her lungs sinking with something on the other side, as though the attic itself had borrowed her body to practice the act of living. The banister beneath her palm seemed softer than wood, pliant, almost warm. For a moment she thought she felt another hand resting atop hers, weightless but undeniable, guiding her grip. She looked down quickly, nothing, only dust clinging to her skin, fine as ash. Yet when she blinked, she could not tell whether the dust had been there a moment ago or if it had fallen from somewhere above, sifted down through the cracks. The air thickened. In her mind, or was it memory? She saw herself as a child again, standing at the bottom of these very stairs, staring upward, too afraid to climb. But the child did not stay still. She turned her head, met Claire's eyes across years, and beckoned with one finger before slipping out of sight. Her breath caught. The image clung like an afterimage on the inside of her eyelids, refusing to fade. The key throbbed faintly, not pulsing like a clock or a heartbeat, but spiraling, its rhythm pulling her inward, looping back on itself, coaxing her to believe she had always been here, always at this door, always about to turn the lock. She leaned closer, listening, and from beyond the door, just faint enough to question, came the echo of her own voice. Not a word, only the soft, shivering sound of breath, rising and falling, as though someone on the other side was waiting in perfect synchrony, inhaling when she inhaled, exhaling when she exhaled. The key turned with almost no resistance. The sound it made was not the click of metal on metal, but a low sigh, as though the house itself had been holding its breath all these years, and now released it through her hand. Dust lifted in a slow spiral, catching the dim light of the landing like a swarm of pale insects, drifting upward rather than down. The knob felt warmer than before, pliant in her palm, the texture of old wood gone soft as though flesh lay just beneath the paint. She pressed, hesitant, and the door moved inward, not with a creak but with a deep groan, the kind that resonated in her bones rather than her ears. The space beyond was dark at first, utterly black, swallowing the weak glow from the landing. For a moment she thought the attic was empty, hollow, nothing more than a trap of anticipation. But as her eyes adjusted, faint shapes emerged, boxes stacked in uneven towers, trunks sealed with leather straps, a collapsed rocking chair that seemed frozen mid-motion. The smell reached her next. Dust, fabric left too long, wood dry and brittle, but beneath it, something else, faint and metallic, like iron left out in the rain. She stepped inside. The floorboards groaned beneath her weight, though the sound did not echo properly. Instead, it seemed to fold inward, as if the room absorbed it rather than returned it. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the beams, bending at angles that resisted the direction of her lantern light. At the far end of the attic, something shifted. Not a box, not the settling of wood, but something quieter, more deliberate, the faint rasp of fabric against fabric, as though something unseen had brushed past. She froze, straining to listen. Silence returned, heavy, deliberate. Her gaze drifted upward. The ceiling sloped low, beams running across, each one furred with webs and dust. But between them, she thought she saw markings faintly etched into the wood. Circles, spirals, patterns half familiar from dreams she could not fully recall. They blurred when she tried to focus, as though they resisted direct sight, sliding away into the periphery. She moved deeper, her lantern beam trembling across the clutter. Every object seemed positioned with purpose rather than chance, as if arranged for someone to return and find them exactly so. She felt less like an intruder than a guest arriving late to a gathering that had already begun. And then she noticed the trunk. It sat in the center of the attic, not pushed aside like the others, but set deliberately, alone. Its lid shut tight. The leather straps across it seemed fresh, not brittle, as though tightened recently. A faint line of dust ringed the floor around its base, yet the trunk itself bore none. Its surface too clean, too expectant. Her lantern light caught on something small resting atop it. Another key. This one thinner, darker, its edges sharp as though cut yesterday. She reached for it without thinking, the movement automatic, her breath shallow, her pulse already falling into rhythm with the silent weight of the room. And as her fingers brushed the metal, she swore she felt the attic lean closer, listening, waiting, as though the act of opening had only just begun. Her fingers lingered on the second key, the metal faintly slick, as if it had only just been pressed from a mold. She drew it into her palm, and for a moment the attic seemed to hush, the silence folding itself into tighter layers, as though the room itself was holding her breath for her. She looked at the trunk. Its presence distorted the space around it, boxes leaning subtly away, shadows bowing inward, as if it were not an object at all but the center of a quiet gravity. Dust floated in slow spirals above it, motes that should have been random but turned in steady rhythm, like the turn of a clock she could not see. Her grandmother's voice returned to her, not in words but in fragments, tonal shapes that slid between her ears like water through cracks. Sometimes she thought she heard her name, other times nothing but the syllables of a lullaby, stretched until they broke. She closed her eyes and felt herself younger again, knees pressed to the carpet of the upstairs hallway, peering up at the locked attic door. But in this memory, the child she had been turned, not frightened but smiling, eyes wide, and whispered something into the silence. She tried to listen, to lean into the words, but the memory fractured into static before the sentence could complete. When she opened her eyes, the attic seemed wider, the beams stretching higher, the angles skewed as though she had stepped into a version of the house that leaned closer to dream. The trunk remained in the center, but now she thought she saw movement around it. Not solid, not formed, but like impressions in the air, faint depressions where figures might have stood. She felt the urge to count them but stopped halfway through, realizing she did not want to know the number. The key in her palm pulsed once, subtle, as if syncing with the rhythm of her blood. She raised it instinctively, holding it up toward the beams, and the spirals carved into the wood above seemed to answer faint lines glowing in acknowledgement before fading back into shadow. Her lantern flickered. In its stutter of light, the trunk appeared open for a heartbeat, its lid thrown back, darkness spilling over the edges like ink. She thought she saw her own hands reaching out from within, pale and trembling, fingers spread in plea. Then the light steadied. The trunk was closed again, the leather straps tight, as though it had never been touched. Her breath shook. She lowered the lantern, the second key trembling in her grip, uncertain whether she held the means to unlock the trunk or if the trunk had conjured the key itself. The silence deepened, pressing closer, the attic leaning forward again. It was waiting. The lantern sputtered once more, its flame collapsing inward before flaring too bright. And in that sharp, false daylight, the attic no longer looked like wood and dust, but like flesh stretched into the shape of a room. The beams above her were ribs. The floor beneath her bowed as if soft, slick, pulsing faintly. And the trunk, oh God. The trunk was not wood at all, but something breathing, its straps biting into its surface like restraints on a chest that rose and fell, strained and waiting. She staggered back, choking, yet the air that filled her lungs was not air but the taste of rust and damp earth. The shadows she thought were boxes stood upright, faceless, watching, their presence pressed against her temples, their silence speaking louder than any voice could. Then, just as sudden, the lantern steadied again. The attic returned. Wood, dust, silence. The trunk sat in the center, closed, still, waiting. And the key in her palm burned with a quiet inevitability, as though it had already turned itself. The second key slid into the lock with a sound too soft, almost like the whisper of fabric against skin. Claire hesitated, her breath caught in her throat, but her hand did not feel like her own anymore. It moved with a steadiness she could not summon on her own, as though guided by something behind her shoulder. The metal turned, the strap shifted loose, and the trunk shuddered faintly, as if it had been waiting centuries for this exact moment. She expected a creak of hinges, the release of stale air, the dust of forgotten things. Instead, the opening was soundless, seamless, like a mouth parting to inhale. The lid rose not from her effort but by its own accord, a slow and deliberate arc, until the inside yawned open. Darkness lay within, but not the kind that belonged to unlit rooms. This darkness had depth, layers, a texture that rippled like liquid when the lantern's glow touched it. She leaned closer, unwilling and compelled all at once, and the surface shifted, reflecting not the cluttered attic but her own face, faintly distorted, hovering back at her from beneath the shadows. Her reflection moved a second too late. It raised its head after she had already tilted hers, its eyes glinting faintly, its mouth parted as though to speak words she had not formed. Claire staggered back, but the image rose with her, stretching higher than her own height, a silhouette of herself rendered in shadow. Her grandmother's voice coiled from the depths of the trunk, clearer now, threading through the silence. "I told you not to open it, child." The tone was not scolding but mournful, heavy with inevitability, as if the words had been rehearsed for decades. Claire's chest tightened. She wanted to slam the lid shut, but the air around her had thickened, pressing her forward. The attic leaned closer, beams bowing like ribs, the markings above glowing faint spirals that drew her gaze inward. Something stirred in the trunk. Not an object, not a hand or figure, but a ripple of weight, like the pressure of someone shifting beneath a blanket. She felt it resonate through the floor, up her legs, into her lungs. Her reflection blurred, split, and reformed half her face, half another she did not know, mouths moving together in words she could not hear but could feel in her bones. Her knees weakened. She gripped the lantern tighter, though its light seemed dimmer now, swallowed by the dark that pulsed inside the trunk. And then, from that impossible depth, a shape began to rise. Not quickly, not with violence, but with an inevitability so slow and patient that it felt like watching something long buried unfold itself after centuries of waiting. The surface stretched upward like a hand pressing against fabric from the other side. Then fingers formed long, pale, too many joints, bending wrong, and they curled over the edge of the trunk, gripping it as though testing the strength of the world beyond. Claire could not scream. The sound lodged in her throat, strangled by the weight of the silence. Her reflection still stared up at her from the surface, smiling faintly now, its lips curving into an expression she did not feel. And in that moment she understood. The attic had never been about what was hidden inside. It was about who would open it. The attic no longer felt like a room. It felt like a lung, expanding and contracting with her every breath. Its silence shaped not by absence but by rhythm. The air thickened with dust that was not dust at all, but fine grains of memory, particles of voices long dissolved, swirling in lazy spirals that clung to her eyelashes and skin. The trunk remained open, its interior a black pool that rippled with faint light like oil disturbed by unseen movement. The pale fingers curled tighter against its rim, and for an instant she could not tell if they were drawing themselves upward or pressing down to keep her from leaving. She blinked, and the attic shifted. The beams overhead sagged lower, the spirals carved into them glowing faintly, rotating in directions that made her stomach twist. The walls pulsed with warmth, their shadows bending like curtains in a wind she could not feel. The boxes that lined the walls seemed to shuffle closer, closing ranks, their outlines blurring into human shapes that leaned forward, craning to watch. Her grandmother's lullaby returned, not hummed this time but sung low and unbroken, the voice neither near nor far, threading through the dark like smoke. Claire knew the tune but not the words, yet somehow she mouthed them along, her lips moving to syllables that rose unbidden from inside her chest. Each sound she formed was not her own voice, but the voice from the trunk, echoing slightly ahead of her. Her lantern dimmed to a glow no brighter than a candle flame. Shadows deepened, stretching thin across the floor like ink veins. From them rose fleeting shapes. A child crouched, her own face at age 7, a figure in her grandmother's shawl, head bent, a man with no mouth, watching silently from the corner. They flickered, half-made, then melted back into the seams of the dark, as though the attic tested what image would bend her the most. She tried to step back, but the floor felt soft, adhesive, clinging to her shoes like damp earth. Each shift of her weight was swallowed. Each thought of escape dulled into hesitation. The trunk quivered, its surface shimmering with movement. The reflection of her face returned, but it was no longer synchronous. It tilted its head before she did, its lips parting into a whisper she could not hear but could feel, vibrating deep in her marrow. Claire raised the key still clutched in her hand, though she no longer remembered lifting it. For a breathless instant, she thought she might need to turn it again, as if the trunk demanded a second unlocking, a deeper one. And in that suspended moment, the attic leaned closer. Everything leaned closer, the walls, the beams, the shadows, the silence itself, until she felt herself balanced on the edge of a spiral. The whole house waiting, poised, a single breath away from collapse. The attic shuddered, not with sound, not with movement she could measure, but with a shift so total that her body no longer knew where weight belonged. The walls bowed inward, the beams pressed down. The very air sank into her lungs as though the house had chosen to breathe her instead. The trunk convulsed. Its lid yawned wider, impossibly wide, the darkness within spilling outward in tendrils that did not spread but reached curling, stretching, tasting the air. One brushed against her wrist, and though it left no mark, her skin burned with recognition, as if it had found something in her it already owned. She tried to step back, but her feet no longer remembered the act of retreat. They were rooted, fused to the attic floor, which now throbbed faintly under her soles. Her lantern tumbled from her hand, extinguishing before it hit the ground, leaving her in a dim shimmer not of flame but of the spirals above, glowing brighter, rotating faster, their geometry tugging at her vision until she felt her own thoughts rearranged to fit their pattern. The reflection in the trunk rose higher, pulling itself upright though no body followed. It was her and not her, lips parted in a smile she did not feel, eyes gleaming with an intelligence that was not hers. When she raised her hand in protest, the reflection lifted first, bending its fingers in mockery, then spreading them wide as though opening a door. Her grandmother's voice surged again, closer now, no longer mournful but commanding. "It wanted you. It has always wanted you." Claire screamed, but the sound bent wrong, slipping from her throat as laughter, low and hollow, echoing from the trunk rather than her own lips. She clutched at her chest, feeling her heartbeat not beneath her skin but radiating from the attic walls. The rhythm shared, indistinguishable, the house pulsing with her, or she with it. The fingers on the trunk's edge curled tighter, pulling the darkness upward, and then the thing rose not with speed but with inevitability, as though it had already been here all along, waiting only for permission. Its shape was human and not human, its outline constantly shifting between herself, her grandmother, and strangers she had never seen but somehow recognized. The attic convulsed again, dust falling like ash, the spiral marks blazing with light that scorched her vision. And then it was inside her, not in a violent rush, not an interruption of force, but in a quiet folding, emerging as seamless as breath. She gasped, but the sound that left her mouth was not hers. She blinked, but the eyes that opened did not belong to her. Her body stood, her lungs filled, her heart beat, but something else moved through her now, as natural as if it had always been there. The trunk stood empty, its lid wide, straps limp. The attic had gone still, the spirals dimming, the shadows easing back into their places. Everything looked the same as when she had entered, only she was different. And as Claire descended the stairs, the house followed in silence, listening through her breath, watching through her eyes, waiting with her hands. Story 3. The Dollmaker's Room. The old toy shop still stood at the corner of the abandoned street, its windows black with grime, its wooden sign swaying faintly as though in a wind no one else could feel. Claire. No, not Claire, but a woman with her same slanted gait, as if the attic still clung to her bones, found herself there at dusk, though she could not remember walking. The front door hung slightly ajar, not broken but left, as though the shop had always been waiting for her return. Inside, the air smelled of varnish and fabric, of cedarwood drawers and forgotten cloth. Dust lay in thick sheets across the counter, except in certain places where the wood shone clean, polished by the weight of small, recent hands. The deeper she stepped, the more she noticed. Dolls lined in rows, each with porcelain faces cracked by time, their eyes glassy but alive with the glimmer of faint reflections. They stared at her not with malice but with quiet expectation, as if her arrival was a continuation rather than an intrusion. The room at the back was half open, shadows pooling beyond it. On the door, faintly carved into the wood, was a pattern she almost recognized, a spiral, so similar to the one on the attic beams. Only here, it looped tighter, almost closing upon itself. Something stirred behind the door. Not loud, just the faintest scrape of wood on stone, the way a chair might be pulled across a floor, or a small body might shift its weight on a shelf. Her breath thinned. The hush of the shop pressed around her, muffling the world, the air so heavy with stillness that she felt her own pulse loud enough to shame her. She should have left. She should have stepped back into the fading light of the street. But her hand rose, and with a trembling push, she slid the door open. The room inside breathed with its own rhythm. It was not empty. The room behind the half-open door did not reveal itself all at once. At first it was nothing but layers of shadow, a thickness that seemed to hold its own weight. The longer she stared, the more she realized it was not merely dark, but veiled, like fabric draped over a shape that shifted just enough to remind her it was not still. She stepped inside. The air changed, denser here, tinged with something faintly sweet, like sugared almonds left too long, their sweetness collapsing into rot. The walls were lined with shelves that seemed to tilt downward, as though straining under burdens unseen. On each shelf sat dolls not new, not antique, but something in between, as though they had been remade over and over again, their faces neither old nor young, their expressions almost but not quite human. Her eyes moved across them, and for a moment she thought she recognized features. A jawline too sharp, a nose too crooked, eyes the exact shade of someone she once passed on a train. But when she tried to look again, the resemblance dissolved, leaving porcelain smooth and unreadable. The air hummed faintly, though there was no sound. It was more like vibration in her teeth, a low resonance that did not belong to any machine she knew. It made her vision swim, edges of shelves bending like heat haze, dolls rocking imperceptibly though no draft touched them. In the center of the room stood a table. Its surface bore tools, scissors, needles, thread pulled taut between spools. A wooden frame leaned against it, half covered by a cloth, and beneath that cloth something protruded, something too large for a toy, yet too small for a person. She reached for the cloth, but her hand faltered midway. The dolls on the shelves seemed to sway in unison, ever so slightly, a ripple of glass eyes shifting their reflections toward her hand. She withdrew, heart pressing tight against her ribs. And then she realized the humming was no longer in her teeth alone. It was in her chest, in her bones, in the beat of her pulse. The room was breathing her. The silence stretched, thick and velvet, until she almost forgot what silence was. Her hand hovered above the covered frame on the table, trembling slightly in the stale air. The hum in her bones deepened, threading itself into rhythm, a pulse not her own. Something shifted on the shelves. It was not sound she heard, not movement she saw, but the soft knowledge of change, the way one feels the air ripple when someone steps into a room. Her eyes darted upward, and for a moment all the dolls seemed as they had been, porcelain, painted, unblinking. Then, almost imperceptibly, their eyes moved, not in a sudden turn, not in a dramatic swivel, but in a slow drag, the way stars creep across the night sky if one stares too long. A fraction of a degree, glass orbs aligning, until every doll in the room gazed in the same direction. At her, her throat tightened. She stepped back instinctively, and the dolls swayed in response. Not together, not mechanical, but as if each body carried its own weight, adjusting subtly to maintain balance. A hand twitched here, a head tilted there, porcelain joints creaking faintly like branches in a distant forest. She tried to speak, but no sound came. The covered shape on the table stirred beneath the cloth, only slightly, as though exhaling. The fabric lifted a breath's width before settling back, the movement so small she could have dismissed it, had the dolls not leaned forward at the same moment, their faces angling closer in unison. The air pressed colder, her skin prickled, and then came the sound. Faint, high-pitched, a single note, like the tightening of a violin string just before it snaps. It cut through the silence, trembled in the rafters, then fractured into whispers. Not one voice, not many, but a chorus of almost voices, syllables that brushed the edge of language without forming words. The dolls moved again, not walking, not rising, but their positions changed all the same. One moment a row of identical figures sat shoulder to shoulder. The next, a gap opened where a doll should have been, its porcelain face now inches closer to the edge of the shelf, closer to her. She turned, searching for the door. The shadows had thickened, the frame she had passed through barely visible, as though the room had stretched its walls outward, pushing escape just a little further away. The covered frame on the table trembled once more, harder this time, and the cloth began to slide. She could not look away. The cloth did not fall at once. It slid in increments, as though teased by fingers she could not see, lifting at one corner, pausing, then curling back as if to savor the moment of revelation. Each shift of the fabric drew the air tighter, until the silence pressed against her eardrums like deep water. The dolls swayed, not with sound, not with visible movement, but with presence, their porcelain heads angled lower, their shoulders leaning forward. An audience gathered not for her but for the thing beneath the cloth. Their glass eyes glimmered faintly, catching light where no light was, forming constellations that stared with the weight of 100 gazes. Her chest rose and fell too quickly. She tried to slow her breath, but the rhythm refused to obey. The hum that had lived in her bones since she entered now layered itself into something richer. Not one tone, but chords, harmonics that thickened with every second the cloth drifted. They resonated inside her, tugging at marrow and memory alike. For an instant she saw the room as it must once have been, bright with oil lamps, shelves brimming not with cracked dolls but fresh, new faces, painted smiles, still gleaming. A man hunched at the table, back bowed, hands moving in patient, meticulous rhythm as he stitched another body into being. She could almost hear his breathing, steady and purposeful, as though the dolls had once inhaled through him. Then the vision dissolved, leaving only the sagging shelves, the peeling paint, the endless stairs. The cloth lifted higher. From beneath it came a sound, not the creak of wood or the rattle of porcelain, but a sigh, long, shallow, unmistakably human. It slipped into the air and coiled around her, the way a dream clings to waking skin. Her knees weakened. She wanted to turn, to flee, yet her body swayed forward instead, drawn by the soft gravity of the table. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the wood, and at that moment, the dolls exhaled with her, a single breath, collective, synchronized, as though the room itself had lungs. The cloth slipped another inch. What peeked beneath was not skin, not porcelain, not wood. It was an edge of something smoother, darker, reflective like water held perfectly still. Her own distorted eye blinked back at her from its surface, a reflection trapped inside before she could look away. The whisper voices thickened, crowding the edges of the air. They did not speak words, but they pulsed with the rhythm of one thought, repeated endlessly, pressing against her skull until she almost heard it clearly. Look, the cloth was ready to fall. The cloth fell in silence. It did not flutter, did not drift, did not make the faint sound fabric should. It simply slipped away, as though it had never truly been cloth at all, only a thin membrane that had finally dissolved. What lay beneath was not what she expected. At first glance it seemed a doll, yet larger, nearly the size of a child, its body stitched with fabric too pale, its limbs bent at wrong angles as though they had been fastened in haste. But the face, oh, the face was no porcelain mask. It was smooth, dark, reflective, like glass stretched too thin. Her own features stared back at her from that mirror surface, warped, delayed, moving half a second after she did. She recoiled, but the reflection leaned forward. The hum in the room surged, pressing into her skull, into her chest, the vibrations now more like a chant than a note. The dolls lining the shelves rocked faintly in rhythm, their heads dipping and rising, 100 glass throats joining in voiceless ceremony. She tried to step back, but the reflection inside the glass face followed closer, rising as though to meet her halfway out of the surface. Its lips parted, not with her breath, but with its own. A sound spilled forth, soft, childlike, intimate, her grandmother's lullaby, the same tune that had haunted her dreams since the attic, only now sung in her own timbre, her own voice. Her legs weakened. She clutched the table for balance, and the stitched figure twitched in response, one hand jerking upward as though tethered to her movement. Its fingers spread, thread pulling taut at the seams, skinless joints creaking, The reflection smiled, and then the stitched body exhaled. The sigh was wet, heavy, impossibly deep for a body that should not breathe. The air that escaped carried with it the scent of varnish and ash, of something both preserved and rotting. It filled her lungs, invaded her blood, and for a moment she was certain she had breathed that same air before, long ago, in dreams she had never been able to recall upon waking. Her hand moved again without her. It lifted slowly, trembling. The stitched figure's hand lifted with it, fingers curling around an invisible thread that stretched between them. She felt the pull, not on her skin, but somewhere deeper, as though the seam of her own soul was being unpicked. The dolls on the shelves bent lower, glass eyes gleaming, reflections multiplying across the mirrored face until she could no longer tell which version was hers, which version belonged to the stitched thing. Her pulse faltered, and in the silence that followed, the stitched figure spoke, not in words, not in sound, but directly into her bones, as clearly as if she had always known the voice. "You are unfinished." The words "you are unfinished" did not echo in her ears. They sank deeper, stitching themselves into her marrow as if they had always been there, waiting for her to arrive. The stitched figure on the table jerked upright with a convulsive shudder, threads snapping at its joints but holding fast, the sound like tendons straining, its mirrored face tilted toward her, reflecting her wide eyes, her trembling lips, and then worse, refusing to reflect her at all. In its surface she saw not herself but an absence, a hollow space, as though the mirror had decided she no longer existed. Her knees buckled, and the air thickened. The dolls on the shelves began to sway more violently, their porcelain jaws creaking open though no sound emerged. Yet the silence was louder than screams, a pressure, a command. The stitched figure raised its hand again, palm outward, and she felt her own hand rise to meet it without willing the motion. When their palms aligned hers flesh, its porcelain-threaded imitation, the room convulsed. The hum split into chords, the chords split into voices, and the voices braided into a single cry that filled every crack of the toy shop. "Finish her." Threads spilled from the figure's fingers like veins of light, silvery and endless, weaving through the air until they sank into her skin. The sensation was neither pain nor relief, but something older, stranger, like remembering a limb she had forgotten she once lost. Each filament stitched into her arms, her chest, her skull, until her movements blurred with its. When she tried to scream, the sound came from its throat, the stitched body rasping her fear in her own timbre. The dolls leaned forward, jaws clattering shut, heads tilting as though satisfied with the progress. Their glass eyes gleamed brighter, mirroring not light but the threads that bound her, hundreds of tiny versions of herself, strung in miniature reflections across the room. Her vision split. She was in her body and she was in the stitched one, her perspective sliding between both like oil on water. When she blinked, the stitched figure's eyelids fell instead. When she moved her lips, its mouth opened, whispering words she had not yet spoken. She tried to pull away, but the threads pulled tighter, sewing thought to thought, bone to wood, breath to silence. Her chest hitched. She could feel her heartbeat now in two places, once in her ribs, and once in the hollow cavity of the stitched body, pulsing faintly like an infant organ learning to live. The mirrored face brightened, no longer a flat reflection but a surface alive, rippling with dozens of versions of her. They spoke all at once, their mouths forming the same shape, their voices threading through her skull. "You are ours. You always were." The table shuddered. The stitched figure leaned closer. She felt herself tilting forward against her will, lips inches from the glass-smooth face, drawn into its surface as though her breath might collapse the distance. The last thing she felt before the room dissolved into white heat was the thread piercing her tongue, sowing silence where her voice had been. The light that had flared in her skull ebbed slowly, like embers drifting back into ash. She did not know when she had closed her eyes, only that when they opened again, the toy shop was quiet, still, drenched in a dusk that did not belong to any clock she knew. The table was bare, no stitched figure, no threads gleaming like veins of silver. Only the cloth lay crumpled there, but even it looked different, dull, brittle, as if it had been rotting for decades. She reached for it, but her hand hesitated midway, trembling with the memory of strings piercing her skin. Her palm looked the same, though faint lines glimmered beneath the surface, too faint to be scars, too persistent to be dismissed. The dolls on the shelves had returned to their rigid poses, heads upright, eyes forward, bodies inert. Yet she could not shake the certainty that their silence was not absence, but patience, watching without gaze, listening without ears. She staggered toward the door. Her footsteps made no sound. Not muffled, not muted, simply absent, as though the room no longer acknowledged her weight. Each shelf seemed taller now, each doll larger, their glass faces catching a gleam from nowhere, her reflection moving across 100 surfaces, never quite in sync. By the time she reached the threshold, the hum had settled into her chest, softer now, almost a lullaby, one that aligned itself with her heartbeat. She pressed her palm against the wooden frame of the door, and the wood seemed to pulse back, matching her rhythm. She stepped outside. The street was empty. The air was colder. The toy shop behind her sagged with age, its windows boarded, its sign long since fallen. No glow from within, no shelves of dolls, no lingering hum. And yet, when she raised her hand to her chest, she felt the pull of thread woven beneath her skin. The faintest tug, gentle but unyielding, reminding her that some seams could never be undone. She walked on, but in the glass of every darkened window she passed, her reflection lagged just half a second behind. Story 4. The Clock in the Orchard. The path to the orchard was not one she remembered taking, and yet she found herself there, as though drawn by a rhythm older than footsteps. The trees stood in endless rows, their branches arching above to form a kind of cathedral, the leaves whispering with a voice too steady to be wind. The ground beneath was soft, not grass but loam that seemed to breathe faintly, rising and falling like the chest of a sleeper. She wandered deeper, her shoes sinking slightly into the soil. At first the orchard looked uniform, every tree a mirror of the last, each trunk gnarled and swollen with the weight of years. But then she noticed the fruit, not apples, not pears, not anything she had ever known. They were pale and luminous, shaped like clocks without hands, their surfaces smooth and round, their faces marked only by faint concentric rings, like water ripples frozen in wood. The orchard grew stiller the farther she walked. The whispers of leaves slowed, then ceased, until the silence pressed heavy, a silence that seemed to listen. She reached up, brushing her fingers against one of the pale fruits, and it shivered under her touch. A tremor ran down the branch, into the trunk, into the ground beneath her feet, until the whole orchard seemed to inhale. From deep within the rows, she heard it, a ticking, not loud, not sharp, but steady, muffled, like a heartbeat hiding behind walls. She turned, searching for the sound, but every direction looked the same. Endless trees, endless fruit, endless silence waiting between ticks. The air grew colder. She walked on, and there, at the very center of the orchard, she saw it. A grandfather clock, standing alone, rooted in the soil, its wooden frame warped by age, its pendulum swaying in time with the breath of the earth. No house around it, no walls, no ceiling, only that clock, as though it had grown from the ground like the trees themselves. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized. It had no hands either, only a face of pale wood, carved with faint concentric rings. And yet, the ticking grew louder. She circled the clock, cautious yet compelled, her steps muffled by the loam that seemed softer here, almost like fabric stretched tight beneath her feet. The air around the clock carried a chill, not the natural coolness of night, but something distilled, as though all warmth had been siphoned away to make room for its presence. The clock was taller than she first thought, its spire brushing the low canopy of the orchard, branches bending back as if in deference. Its surface, once perhaps polished oak, now carried the pallor of bone, bleached and ridged with faint grooves that resembled growth rings. When she leaned close, she could not tell if it was carved or grown. The pendulum swayed with exaggerated slowness, back and forth, each arc pulling time thinner, stretching it like wax beneath a flame. And though its face bore no hands, no markings, her eyes kept searching for them, convinced she might see a shadow of one appear in the periphery if only she held still long enough. She blinked, and for a moment, she thought she saw them. Two long hands, black and delicate, pointing not to numbers but to directions unknown. They wavered like reflections in water, present one breath and gone the next, leaving behind only the pale, ringed surface. The ticking was louder now, but not confined to the clock. It came from the trees, from the fruit, from the very soil. She crouched low, pressing her palm to the earth, and felt it beneath her skin, a rhythm older than heartbeat, older than breath, a ticking that was not a measure of time, but of waiting. She straightened and realized the orchard had shifted. The rows no longer aligned. The paths between them had twisted, curving back upon themselves in spirals that drew the eye toward the clock again and again, no matter which way she turned. The trees leaned inward, branches knotted like ribs of a chest, enclosing her in a cage of wood and silence. She looked back at the clock, and now the pendulum had stopped. The air held stillness so complete it felt like suffocation. The silence no longer listened, it commanded. Her breath trembled, and in that fragile moment before the next sound, she realized with certainty the clock was waiting for her. The silence stretched so long she felt her own pulse dissolve into it, her body reduced to little more than a vessel for waiting. The pendulum, still and vertical, seemed frozen in glass. She stared at it, afraid to blink, certain that even the smallest movement on her part would set something in motion. Then it came, a single chime. It rang not from the clock's hollow chest, but from the orchard itself. The sound spread outward in concentric waves, the same pattern carved into the clock's face, rippling through the rows of trees until the air itself seemed to bend beneath its weight. The chime was low, impossibly deep, more felt than heard. It lodged itself in her sternum, rattling her bones until her vision blurred. Her knees buckled, and she pressed a hand against the trunk nearest her for balance. The bark throbbed faintly beneath her palm, as though the tree itself was resonating. The fruit hanging above began to sway. Pale, handless clocks shivered on their branches, and with each movement came another faint tick, overlapping in a chaotic cascade, until the orchard pulsed like a swarm of beating hearts. The air thickened with sound, no longer silence, but a pressure that filled her lungs and squeezed her breath into shallow fragments. She looked back to the clock. The pendulum moved again. It swung with glacial weight, each arc cutting the air like the swing of an axe, and though the face still bore no hands, she saw shadows bloom across its surface, faint black lines that shifted as she watched, not marking hours but forming a shape, an arrow pointing directly at her. Her breath caught. The second chime followed, this one higher, shriller, almost human. It pierced her ears until she pressed her palms to her skull, but the sound was not outside, it was inside, echoing from the cavity of her ribs. Her teeth ached with it. Her vision flickered, and in the flicker, she saw them, figures standing between the trees, indistinct at first, then sharper, not people, not entirely. They were shapes draped in shadows, bodies bent like branches, faces smooth and pale as the fruit above. Their heads all turned in perfect unison toward the clock, as if summoned by its call. The third chime rose, long and hollow. This one she did not hear at all. She felt it bloom inside her skull, a vibration that dissolved the orchard into a haze. Her knees gave way, and she sank to the earth, the soil pulsing beneath her palms. When she looked up again, the figures between the trees had drawn closer, forming a silent ring. The clock had not moved, yet it seemed taller now, wider, its face looming like a moon at the center of a black sky. And though no hands marked the hour, she knew with a certainty beyond reason what the chimes were counting. They were counting her. She stayed on her knees, her breath shallow, her hands sinking slightly into the soil as though the earth itself wanted to keep her there. The orchard no longer felt like rows of trees, but like a great hall, its canopy rising into vaulted shadows, its trunks forming silent pillars that held up a ceiling she could not see. The figures were not rushing toward her. They did not need to. They simply stood among the trees, their bodies swaying faintly as if mimicking the pendulum's arc, their pale faces lifting toward the clock with a devotion that seemed older than worship. Each time the pendulum reached the farthest edge of its swing, their forms shimmered, growing thinner, like candle flames on the verge of being snuffed, only to re-solidify when the pendulum began its return. She tried to count them, 10 at first, then 15, then more, multiplying with every breath, until it seemed each tree had grown not only fruit but a shadow of its own, detached from trunk and bark, standing upright like a second orchard of faceless pilgrims. The ticking pressed harder in her skull, not the steady rhythm of a clock anymore, but a layered chorus, as though 1,000 unseen clocks had begun to beat in staggered time, creating a tide that pulled at her sense of self. She pressed her palms to her ears, desperate to block it out, but the sound only grew louder, not in the air but in her bones. The fruit above swayed harder. Their pale faces seemed to tilt, each one turning in uncanny rhythm until they all angled downward, reflecting faint distortions of her own image. In every fruit, a fragment of her. An eye, a mouth, a half-formed silhouette, all moving half a second behind her own gestures. Her heart raced, and in the blur of panic she thought she saw something more, a seam splitting across the surface of one fruit, a hairline crack widening, not with rot but with breath. It pulsed as if lungs beat beneath its smooth exterior, a tiny rhythm echoing the same tempo that rattled through her chest. The figures swayed again, closer now. Their arms hung stiff at their sides, their heads bowed and lifted in tandem, as though the orchard had given them one thought to share. The silence between ticks seemed to lengthen, to deepen, stretching her sense of waiting into something unbearable. Then, between one blink and the next, they all turned, not toward the clock, toward her. They turned without a sound, the orchard's silence deepening into something vast, oppressive, like the pause before a storm breaks. Their faceless heads tilted in unison, and though no eyes looked upon her, she felt the weight of their attention pierce more sharply than sight. The figures did not walk. They drifted. Their feet, if they had feet at all, barely touched the earth, their bodies advancing with the slow inevitability of tidewater. Each sway of the pendulum seemed to draw them closer, as though the clock itself pulled invisible strings that dragged them across the soil. With every swing, another few steps. With every chime, another row of trees emptied into faceless forms, until the orchard was no longer a grove of fruit and wood, but a gathering of shadows converging. She stumbled backward, though the earth beneath her knees no longer felt like soil but something softer, yielding, as though she knelt on a giant pulse. The ticking inside her chest matched the orchard's rhythm, and with each beat she could not tell whether her body was moving to the sound, or the sound was moving her. The fruit overhead swayed harder, pale spheres clashing softly together like muffled bells. From some of them seeped thin threads of light, silvery strands that dangled downward, brushing her shoulders as though reaching to entwine with her hair. The orchard smelled now of iron and sap, a metallic sweetness that clung to her tongue. The first figure reached the clearing around the clock. It halted at the boundary, arms still rigid, head tilting to one side as if listening. Then, slowly, it raised one hand. The motion was stiff, but deliberate, each joint bending like wood forced to mimic flesh. Another figure mirrored the movement, then another, until the entire ring lifted their arms toward her, pale palms upturned in a gesture that was neither invitation nor threat, but something stranger, something ritualistic, rehearsed for centuries. The pendulum swung wider, the air bending with each arc, and though the clock had no hands, she felt time closing in seconds, no longer a line, but a circle tightening around her. The figures advanced again. She tried to stand, to run, but the soil clung to her knees, rising slightly as if reluctant to let her go. The orchard's rows warped further, trees leaning inward until their branches formed a woven ceiling, locking her inside a chamber made not of stone but of wood and breath. The clock towered at the center, pendulum cutting the silence, faceless surface glowing faintly now, as if the pale wood had begun to inhale light from every corner of the orchard. And then she realized, the figures were not gathering at random. They were aligning, each one stepping into place at the curve of an invisible circle drawn in the soil, their pale heads bowing in unison as though marking hours that no clock dared inscribe. She stood at the center of that circle, pinned beneath the weight of their voiceless devotion. The pendulum slowed, and as it reached the height of its swing, every figure's head snapped upright at once, the orchard convulsing with a silence so absolute, it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. Then came the fourth chime. The fourth chime did not end. It lingered, unraveling into the air like a ribbon of sound that refused to fade. The orchard quivered beneath its resonance, every leaf vibrating as though made of glass, every branch humming with tension. The fruit swung harder, not as if moved by wind, but as though they too had joined the chime, their pale surfaces flickering with faint light, faces swelling and contracting in rhythm with her pulse. She pressed her hands to the soil, but the earth itself trembled, fine cracks opening beneath her palms. From within them seeped a faint glow threads of light that spread like roots, connecting tree to tree, figure to figure, circle to circle, until she saw the orchard for what it was, not a grove, but a mechanism. The figures no longer seemed separate. They were parts of the clock, their rigid bodies aligning into positions that mimicked numerals, their pale faces turning toward her like lenses. When she blinked, she thought she saw them as gears interlocking, grinding slowly, their movements synchronized by the pendulum's swing. The orchard was breathing, ticking, moving as one enormous body, and she was locked inside its chest. The chime swelled louder. Her body responded without consent, ribs shuddering in sync with the vibration, blood rushing faster as if urged forward by some unseen pump. She felt it in her teeth, her jaw, her skull. When she tried to close her eyes, she found the lids heavy, resisting, as though her body wanted to stay open, to remain awake until the hour completed. Above her, the branches writhed, leaves unfurled into shapes that resembled hands, clutching at the fruit, tugging gently until threads of silver drooled down from stem to soil, connecting the orchard even tighter. She could taste metal on her tongue, bitter and sharp. Though she had bitten nothing, the figures raised their arms higher. Their pale hands glowed faintly now, the light threading upward into the air until they formed a circle of illumination, a crown of ghostly fire encircling her. Within its glow, she thought she saw movement shadows bending and breaking, as though unseen creatures pressed their faces against the membrane of the world, waiting for the hour to open wide enough to let them through. The pendulum halted mid-swing. The orchard held its breath. For one impossible moment, everything froze. Trees, fruit, figures, even her own lungs. She could not inhale, could not exhale. Time itself seemed to have paused. Then came the fifth chime, and with it, her reflection split from her body, rising like vapor, pale and translucent, standing beside her yet moving just half a second behind. The fifth chime bled into silence, but it was not a silence of relief, it was the silence of a space about to rupture. Her reflection stood beside her, translucent and shimmering, moving with the same motions but always a fraction behind, as though she were watching herself live a memory a moment too late. When she lifted her arm, the reflection hesitated, then followed. When she gasped, its mouth opened soundlessly after hers, a ghost tethered to her body by invisible thread. The orchard convulsed, branches arched overhead, weaving tighter until the canopy sealed like a vault. The fruit, once still, spun slowly on their stems, their pale surfaces no longer blank, but etched with dark notches, marks like the beginnings of numbers, scratched by unseen hands. Each spin shifted the marks, aligning them, until she realized with dread they were forming a clock face in the air above, a vast circle of luminous fruit marking an hour that could never be read. The figures leaned forward, no longer a ring of worshippers. They pressed closer, pale bodies bowing toward the clock's center. Their arms remained raised, but their faces now tilted directly at her, their surfaces rippling faintly, as though beneath them something stirred, something waiting to break through the thin membrane of skin. She saw her own image twitch across those faceless masks, fragments of herself smeared like oil on water, dozens of broken versions scattered across the orchard. The sixth chime struck. It rattled the world open. The pendulum swung so wide it should have shattered the clock's casing, yet the wood bent like flesh, absorbing the impossible arc. Her reflection flared brighter, tearing free of her body in jerks, as if eager to step into place among the figures. Its face had grown sharper now, more solid than hers, its delay shrinking until it almost overtook her, lips moving just before her own, eyes blinking in anticipation rather than mimicry. The orchard screamed without sound. Fruit split open one by one, spilling threads of light that tangled across the clearing, weaving nets that caught her ankles and wrists, pulling her gently, inexorably, toward the clock. She fought against it, but the soil beneath her had lost solidity. It rippled like liquid, swallowing her knees, clinging to her weight. The seventh chime echoed. Every figure straightened at once. Their arms snapped downward like clock hands striking an exact mark, a precision that burned her eyes to witness. The orchard brightened, the fruit overhead blazing like pale suns, their notches spinning faster, carving symbols that blurred into motion. Her reflection turned to her then, not behind her, not delayed, but facing her directly. Its mouth moved, shaping words she could not hear, lips stretching into a soundless call. Its eyes, identical yet emptied, locked with hers, and in them she saw the orchard inverted, The figures gathered not around her but inside her, waiting in the chambers of her ribs, swaying in unison with every beat of her heart. The pendulum stopped mid-air. The eighth chime struck bright, shrill, final, and in its resonance, her reflection stepped forward, sliding into her body like a key turning into a lock, the orchard collapsing inward in a rush of fruit, figures, branches, and ticking, all pulled through the hollow of the clock face. When her vision cleared, she stood alone before the grandfather clock. Its pendulum was still, its face was blank, but her shadow on the ground no longer followed her. It moved a heartbeat too soon. The orchard was gone. She stood at the edge of her grandmother's field, dew-soaked grass clinging to her ankles, the pale light of dawn just beginning to slip across the horizon. The air smelled of wet earth and blossoms, ordinary, familiar, as though the night had been nothing but a dream. The grandfather clock loomed beside her. It looked smaller now, less impossible, though its surface still carried the pallor of bone rather than wood. The pendulum hung motionless, its brass dull in the morning haze. She touched the glass, expecting the cold reassurance of silence, but instead felt the faintest vibration beneath her fingertips, like breath trapped behind a window pane. She turned, scanning the field. No figures swayed among the rows. No fruit glowed in the branches, only ordinary trees, heavy with the weight of ripening apples, their leaves stirring gently in a breeze she had not felt in hours. Yet when she looked closer, each apple seemed too round, too pale. The skin stretched tight, as if it hid something watching from within. Her shadow stretched long across the grass. It should have moved with her. Yet when she lifted her hand, she saw the shape on the ground rise a fraction sooner, fingers lifting before her own. The sight froze her more completely than any chime. She stood motionless, breath shallow, testing it again. A step, a turn of the head, the faintest flicker of movement. Always her shadow anticipated her, as though it knew what she would do before she did. The silence of morning pressed against her ears, broken only by the faint ticking that no longer came from the clock. It came from her chest, from her pulse, from the soil beneath her feet, faint and steady, a rhythm she could not escape. She closed her eyes, willing herself to wake fully, to break the dream's hold. But when she opened them, the clock's face was no longer blank. Two black hands had appeared, and they pointed not to any number, but to her. The hunger below the Mojave. Our first story begins not with a scream, but with a digital breadcrumb trail that led us into the heart of the Mojave Desert. For three friends, the silence of the vast, empty landscape was a playground. We were about to learn it was a tomb. It was all Leo's fault, of course. It always was. In our little trio, I was the narrator, the one who tried to keep a level head. Ben was the skeptic, the voice of reason that we usually ignored. And Leo, well, Leo was our enigmatic guide to the forgotten places of the world. He had a strange talent for unearthing the obscure, the abandoned, the places that time had tried to erase. He'd show up with a location scribbled on a napkin, a rumor he'd heard from a guy who knew a guy, and an almost manic gleam in his eyes that was impossible to refuse. This time, it was a cryptic post on some dark web forum he'd been lurking in, the kind of place you need 3 different browsers and a healthy dose of paranoia to even find. The post was simple, accompanied by a grainy, overexposed photo of a hole in the ground. It read, "The sunken maw of the Mojave still hungers. Come and see." Below it, a string of coordinates. That was it. That was all he needed. "You're insane," Ben said, staring at the screen of Leo's phone. The tension was already thick enough to cut with a knife. This is how people end up on the news, man. 3 idiots follow sketchy internet post. Never seen again. "It's not sketchy. It's an invitation," Leo countered, his voice buzzing with excitement. "This is real urban exploring, Ben. Not just some dead mall. This is history." I should have listened to Ben. I really should have. But Leo's obsession was contagious. And so, the next Saturday, we were rattling along in my old Jeep, deep in the Mojave Desert. The paved road had disappeared an hour ago, replaced by a dirt track that was slowly being reclaimed by the sand and scrub brush. The drive was a descent into absolute nothingness. No signs, no power lines, no hint of human life. Just an endless, shimmering expanse of heat and sky. My phone had lost service ages ago. Ben was getting more agitated by the minute. "This is a wild goose chase, Leo. We're going to run out of gas and die out here." And it'll be because you trusted some troll on the internet. Just as I was about to agree, just as the last shreds of my own patience were wearing thin, Ben pointed. What the hell is that? At first, it just looked like a ripple in the landscape, a shadow where there shouldn't be one. But as we got closer, it took shape, a collapsed wooden structure, half buried in the side of a rocky slope. It looked like the skeletal jaws of some long-dead beast, the sunken maw. It was an abandoned mine shaft. Leo didn't say a word. He just pulled out his phone, opened the offline map he'd downloaded, and triumphantly dropped a pin. He turned to Ben, a smug smirk playing on his lips. Lucky, you said? We parked the Jeep and geared up. The air outside was scorching, but as we approached the entrance, a wave of unnatural cold washed over us. It was like stepping into a walk-in freezer. The timbers framing the entrance were bleached and splintered, groaning under the weight of the earth. Leo picked up a rock and tossed it into the darkness. We waited. 1 second, 2, then a faint clang, followed by 2 more, each one softer than the last. Silence. It was deep, really deep. If you trip on the way down, Leo said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, you're probably dead. The descent was tense. It wasn't a straight drop, but a steep, crumbling slope of loose rock and dirt. We relied on the rotting wooden beams lining the walls for support, praying they would hold. The further we went, the colder and quieter it became, until the only sounds were our own ragged breaths and the crunch of debris under our boots. The sunlight from the entrance vanished completely, and we were swallowed by the earth. At the bottom, the shaft leveled out into a large chamber. Our flashlight beams cut through the thick, ancient dust, revealing a scene frozen in time. Rusted ore cart rails disappeared into branching tunnels, and the air smelled stale, like trap time. It was here that we found the first truly unsettling thing. Carved into the thick support beams were strange, spiral symbols. They weren't like any Native American or old settler markings I'd ever seen. They were fluid, complex, and looking at them for too long made my head spin. They felt wrong. We picked a tunnel and started walking, the sense of adventure now replaced by a creeping dread. And then we heard it, a faint scraping sound, metal on rock. It came from somewhere deep in the tunnel ahead. It was rhythmic, steady. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. I froze, looking over at Leo, whose face had gone pale. He'd heard it too. Ben's eyes were wide with terror. He motioned for us to turn off our flashlights, and we plunged into absolute darkness. We stood there, hearts hammering against our ribs, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. Scrape, drag, louder. Whatever it was methodically making its way toward us. That's when Ben panicked. His hand fumbled, and his flashlight flickered on for a split second, a brilliant, stupid cone of light stabbing down the tunnel. The scraping stopped. Dead silence. A silence so profound it was a noise in itself. My ears were ringing. Then, from the darkness ahead, came a loud, violent clang, as if whatever was being dragged had just been dropped. And right after that came the scream. It wasn't human. It was a guttural, wet, tearing sound that seemed to rip through the very fabric of the air. A demonic scream of pure rage and hunger that hit us like a physical blow. We didn't think. We just ran. We scrambled back the way we came, the sound of our own panicked footsteps echoing wildly. I've never run faster in my life. I was in the back, trying to keep up, my lungs on fire, when my foot caught on a loose rock. I went down hard. One of my shoes was ripped from my foot, but there was no time. No time. I scrambled up, ignoring the searing pain in my half-bare foot, and threw myself up the incline. The adrenaline was the only thing that got me out of there. By the time I tumbled out into the blistering sun, my foot was a bloody mess. Leo and Ben practically carried me to the Jeep. We didn't speak a word as we sped away, leaving a plume of dust in our wake. Days later, my foot was still throbbing, a painful reminder of the terror below the Mojave. Ben, looking haunted, insisted we go back. He claimed he'd dropped his wallet when he was helping me. It was a clumsy lie, and we all knew it. He needed to see it again in the daylight. He needed to prove it wasn't real. I needed that too. We drove back out, following the pin Leo had saved. Of course, there was no wallet. But we did find something. My shoe. It was sitting a few feet from the mine's entrance, right in the open. I cautiously walked over and picked it up. A cold dread washed over me. It wasn't just torn. The thick rubber sole had deep compressed gouge marks in it, as if something with immense inhuman pressure had tried to crush it flat. Ben took it from my trembling hands, his face ashen. He ran a finger over the strange, unexplained marks. "Alex," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the desert wind. "Those aren't teeth marks. Not from any animal. But some horrors don't need the darkness of a mind to hunt. Sometimes, they find you in the open, under the false comfort of a starry sky, drawn by the warmth of your fire. The stargazer's inferno. But some horrors don't need the darkness of a mind to hunt. Sometimes, they find you in the open, under the false comfort of a brilliant, starry sky, drawn by the warmth of your fire." My girlfriend, Clara, and I were what you'd call seasoned campers. We'd seen it all: dense forests, misty mountainsides, serene lakes. We weren't afraid of the wild. We craved it. But we'd never done a proper desert camping trip. The idea of that profound, crushing isolation, of a silence so complete you could hear the blood in your ears, it called to us. The main draw, though, was the stargazing. We were chasers of dark skies, fanatics for the kind of cosmic panorama you can only get miles from the nearest hint of light pollution. So I found a spot online, a remote patch of public land deep in some unnamed desert, promising nothing but fire rings and stars. Perfect. We packed the truck and set off, leaving civilization in our rearview mirror. The first couple of nights were everything we'd hoped for. Idyllic. We'd sit by the fire talking nonsense, sharing a drink, and just letting the immense quiet of the place wash over us. Except, it wasn't completely quiet. Both nights, right around when the last embers of the fire were dying down, we heard it, a sound from way out in the distance. It was a low, drawn-out howl, but it had this strange, unsettling quality to it. It didn't sound like a coyote, or any animal I could name. It sounded pained. It sounded like it was trying to mimic a human cry. The first time, we both paused, looking at each other. "Did you hear that?" Clara whispered. I nodded, then laughed it off. "Just desert wildlife," I said, more to reassure myself than her. She agreed, but I saw her pull her jacket a little tighter. The second day, we went for a long hike across the cracked, sun-baked earth. On our way back to the campsite, Clara suddenly stopped. "Ryan, look." She was pointing at the base of a gnarled, skeletal-looking bush. Half buried in the dirt was a small, strange totem. It was a crude thing, just a few brittle twigs lashed together with what looked disturbingly like dark, human hair. A single, jet-black feather was stuck in the center. A wave of unease washed over me. It felt like a violation of the space. "Leave it," Clara said. Her voice quiet but firm. She had a chill, and I could see it. "It's just some weirdo's art project, Clara," I said, trying for a rational tone. I nudged it with the toe of my boot. "Probably left here years ago." I was trying to be the logical one, to brush away the creeping feeling that we were being watched. But my words felt hollow, and I knew I hadn't convinced her. That was the start of the conflict, the moment my stubborn rationality went to war with her intuition. That night, the third night, I was woken from a deep sleep by a sound. Footsteps. Soft at first, just a few faint crunches on the dry dirt right outside our tent. I held my breath, listening. It wasn't an animal. The steps were too steady, too slow, and deliberate, too heavy. My entire body went rigid. I wanted to wake Clara, to grab the heavy flashlight by my head, to shout into the darkness, but I couldn't. I was completely, utterly frozen. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. The steps didn't circle the tent. They just stopped, a few feet from where my head was resting. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. An eternity seemed to pass as I stared at the thin nylon ceiling, every muscle locked, waiting, praying for them to walk away. But they didn't. Instead, I heard a sharp flick, that unmistakable sound. A lighter, a small dancing orange glow appeared against the fabric of the tent. It was about waist-high, a tiny malevolent eye staring in from the darkness. It held steady for a few seconds, then began to wave slowly back and forth, as if inspecting us. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. I just stared at that wavering light, a primal terror taking root in my soul. Then the flame got bigger, way bigger. It erupted from a flicker into a ferocious glow, as if they'd lit a torch. And without warning, Whoever was out there dropped it. I heard a dull thump as it hit the dirt, and a second later, the entire side of our tent burst into flames. The heat was instantaneous and violent. It snapped me out of my paralytic haze. "Clara, wake up, fire!" I screamed, scrambling over her. She woke up with a gasp, immediately understanding. We were a whirlwind of panicked motion, tossing our sleeping bags, our phones, anything we could grab, out of the tent's other exit and onto the dirt. We scrambled out just as the flames began to consume the thin material, the unseen terror of a moment ago replaced by a very real arson attack. Clara grabbed one of our large water jugs and dumped it on the spreading fire while I stomped frantically on the burning patches of grass. We managed to get it under control, but half the tent was a melted, ruined mess. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands shaking, and swept its beam across the surrounding darkness, desperately searching for the person who had just tried to burn us alive. But there was nothing. No one. Just the vast, empty desert. "Pack. Now," Clara said, her voice tight with shock. We started throwing our gear into bags, not caring about order. We just had to get out. We started speed walking in what we thought was the direction of the truck, but in the moonless dark, with no landmarks, we were practically guessing. It didn't take long to realize we were turned around. And that's when I heard it again. That same, distant scream from the first 2 nights. Only this time, it didn't stop. It was a constant, agonized cry. And then another one started up from a different direction. And another. Soon a whole chorus of them rose from the darkness behind us. It was clear now that there were multiple things out there, their voices weaving a symphony of pain and rage. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed Clara's arm and pulled her along faster. By some miracle, we stumbled upon the truck. We threw everything in the back and I peeled out, the tires spitting gravel. The dirt road was rough, and in the frantic tunnel of my high beams, every dip and bend felt like it could flip us. The cacophony of screams pursued us for what felt like miles before finally fading, leaving only the sound of Clara's ragged, terrified sobs. She wasn't just crying from fear. Through her tears, she kept repeating it, over and over like a mantra. "The totem. Ryan, the totem." It was a warning. We were on its land. She was right. We had trespassed. But the desert holds more than just ancient spirits. It's a modern-day labyrinth of human predators. And sometimes, the only thing standing between you and them is a ghost from your own family's past. The ghost's toll. The desert holds more than just ancient spirits. It's a modern-day labyrinth of human predators. And sometimes, the only thing standing between you and them is a ghost from your own family's past. My mother, Elena, is an enigma wrapped in a riddle, sealed with a family secret I was never meant to uncover. She came to America from a dusty Mexican border town to go to college and never looked back. Built a life, met my father, had me, Javier. Her past was a locked room, and she was the only one with a key. Any questions about her childhood, her family, her life before, they were deflected with a sharp joke or a sudden, intense interest in the weather. My dad always said it was old trauma, better left buried, and for a long time I believed him. The only real clue I ever got was a cynical joke she'd tell sometimes after a couple of glasses of wine. My father's family were the politicians, she'd say with a dry laugh. My mother's were the crooks. The problem was, I could never tell which was which. I always thought it was just a dark jab at politics. As I got older, I started to wonder if it was a confession. That, and one other thing, a name. One night when I was about 10, I woke up thirsty and padded out to the kitchen. I passed the living room, which was completely dark, and heard her voice, a quiet, urgent whisper in Spanish. I didn't understand the words, but I heard the name, repeated over and over with a strange mix of fear and reverence. Ricardo. I instinctively flipped the light switch on, my kid brain still scared of the dark. She didn't flinch or scream. It was like she knew I was there. She just slowly hung up the phone and fixed me with a glare so cold it stopped me in my tracks. A look I'd never seen before and have never seen since. "Go back to bed, Javier," she said. And I did. I never mentioned it again. Fast forward to almost a year ago. I was driving through the empty stretches of the Arizona desert, heading to meet up with a college buddy. It was a long, boring drive, the kind where you run out of music and start calling people you haven't spoken to in months. Eventually, I called my mom. We're both huge soccer fans, so we were deep into a debate about the upcoming Champions League fixtures when I saw them. Two dusty pickup trucks, parked sideways, completely blocking the two-lane highway. It didn't look like an accident. My first thought was that maybe someone needed help. I slowed down, still chatting with my mom, not wanting to worry her. I stopped my car a safe distance away and was trying to figure out what to do when my decision was made for me. Three men sprang out from the trucks, all of them holding guns. My blood ran cold. In my rearview mirror, I saw another car pulling up fast behind me, boxing me in. I was unarmed, trapped. Compliance was my only option. One of the men, his face hard and weathered, tapped his gun on my driver's side window, motioning for me to get out. I put my hands up, my heart hammering, and slowly opened the door. The man barked commands at me in rapid-fire Spanish. I consider my inability to speak the language of my own heritage one of my life's great failures, and in that moment, standing in the blistering sun with a gun in my face, that failure felt like a death sentence. It didn't take a translator to understand what they wanted. Before I knew it, they had my phone, my keys, my wallet. It looked like I was about to be stranded in a barren desert, left for the vultures. One of the men, the leader I assumed, got into my truck, and that's when everything took a turn. I'd forgotten to hang up the phone. My truck was still running, the call still active on the speaker. I watched through my window as the man reached for the screen to end the call, but then he froze. His finger hovered over the glowing red button. He cocked his head, listening. I instantly connected the dots. My mom. She must have been talking. The man's entire demeanor shifted. The aggressive posture, the predatory look in his eyes, it all melted away, replaced by shock. He started speaking into the phone, his voice a hushed, rapid stream of Spanish. I couldn't understand any of it, except for one thing. I clearly heard him repeat the name from my childhood memory, but this time it was followed by a title, a name spoken with a new and profound fear. Ricardo, el espectro, the ghost. The other two gunmen must have realized what was happening because they stopped guarding me and walked over to the truck. The man inside rolled down the window, still speaking into the phone, and relayed something to them. All three of them turned and stared at me, their eyes wide, sizing me up as if seeing me for the first time. The conversation didn't last long after that. The man in my truck hung up the phone. They all walked back over to me. Wordlessly, they handed me my keys, my wallet, my phone, everything. One of the men, I noticed he had a distinctive, stylized scorpion tattooed on his wrist, reached into my wallet, pulled out the cash, and pocketed it. He looked me straight in the eye, a cold, unreadable smile on his face. "A toll," he said in a thick accent, "from El Espectro." And just like that, they were gone. They jumped back in their trucks and sped off, not down the highway, but directly into the open desert, disappearing in a cloud of dust. I'd never been so happy to lose a few $100s in my life. Shaking, I drove for a few minutes before calling my mother back. I demanded an explanation. She told me she'd simply threatened them, said she was tracking my location and had already called the police. It was such an obvious lie, blatant BS. But she was adamant, and there was nothing I could do but let it go. I tried to block it out. For months, I succeeded, but the questions kept bubbling to the surface. Who was Ricardo? Who was the ghost? A week ago, I found my answer, or at least, the beginning of one. I was at my parents' house, digging through an old photo album, and there it was. A rare picture of my mother from before she came to America. She was young, maybe 18, smiling into the camera in that forgotten border town. Her arm was linked with a young man who had his arm possessively around her. He was smiling too, a confident, dangerous smile, and on his wrist, coiled and ready to strike, was the exact same scorpion tattoo. The photograph didn't shake. My hands did. Who was my mother? Number what was she? A photograph, a crushed shoe, a burned tent. These are the souvenirs left behind by the desert. The silence that follows. 3 stories, 3 deserts, 1 truth. The most terrifying voids are not the ones on a map, but the ones we carry inside the people we trust most. Each survivor was left with unanswered questions and the haunting echoes of their encounter, a psychological aftermath that clings to them like the fine desert dust. We seek out these vast, empty spaces for silence, for an escape from the noise of our lives. But the desert has a way of stripping away certainty, of peeling back the comfortable lies we tell ourselves. Its silence is not empty. It's a canvas, and on that canvas, it paints our deepest fears. The sheer scale of it makes you feel insignificant, yet it puts every one of your secrets under a magnifying glass. The three horrors were different, yet born of the same desolate landscape. Down in the suffocating dark of the abandoned mineshaft, an ancient, hungry presence waited a horror of what lies beneath our feet. Out on the starlit plains, a territorial, primal force staked its claim, a horror of the wild, untamable world we only think we've conquered. And on a sun-baked stretch of highway, the modern ghost of a violent past proved that the most dangerous monsters are the ones that walk among us, their sins casting long shadows. Human horror. The survivors carry these truths now. They are branded by them. Alex will never again step into a dark, forgotten place. Now, even an elevator ride can trigger a suffocating panic, the memory of what hungers in the earth, a constant weight on his chest. Ryan and Clara sold their camping gear. The beauty of a starry sky is now just a reminder of the unseen terror it once hid, and the lingering fear of that night is a silent, unbreachable wall between them. And Javier now looks at his own mother, the woman who raised him, with a painful mix of love and dread, seeing the ghost of a stranger in her eyes. Every shared silence is now thick with unspoken questions. The family secret is no longer a secret, but a wound that can never be closed. How do you explain a fear like that to someone who wasn't there? The truth is, you can't. They were left, not with answers, but with the silence that follows a scream. A silence filled with the desert's memory. We go to the desert looking for ourselves, but sometimes it forces us to listen to what we'd rather not hear, both in the world outside and in the wilderness within. The desert is always watching, and it never forgets. And so, the night exhales. 7 stories have passed through us like winds moving across an open field, like whispers threading through the rafters of an empty house. Perhaps you feel them lingering still, a door half open in your mind, a sound that might have been the floor settling, or footsteps waiting for you to notice. Remember, horror doesn't always shout. Sometimes it only waits, patient and quiet, in the places you least expect. The orchard, the attic, the reflection that doesn't quite move the way you do. As you close your eyes now, as you surrender to sleep, the stories will follow you. They always do. But don't be afraid. Fear, after all, is just another way of knowing you're still alive to feel it. Until the next night, the next gathering, the next hour that strikes when you're not watching. Good night, and dream carefully.